Hey guys, I'm the 50s kid. This is Ismail. Ismail's back. You remember him from last time we did that key video about how to duplicate keys on an E46 and stuff. We also covered repairing a key. He actually repaired my key for the Black Savage. That was pretty cool. We've been talking. We wanted to do another video, kind of like a follow-up. We figured let's do like a video on the starting system on the E46, the E39, basically just any vehicle that had the M54 or M52 TU engine. And so we said, yeah, that'll be a real cool video. Come out. So he's here. We're going to do it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to figure it out. So let's get started.
Hey guys, nice to see you again.
All right, guys. So let's talk about things from the point of view of the starter. Okay. What does the starter need in order to operate? Well, the starter needs 12 volts coming from the battery. That's what connects on this stud right here. That's the big, thick, red battery cable, okay? It also needs a good ground. It's actually grounded through the engine, through the body of the engine itself. The engine is actually grounded to the body of the car, and the body of the car is eventually grounded to the battery. So you need a good input power and you need a good ground in order for the starter motor to actually run. But in order to actually engage the starter motor, you actually have to have two more inputs. Normally on a car, it's only one input. That input, like in the old days, it would just come from the ignition wire, right? But now in these days, we have immobilizer systems and such. So on this particular starter, on this particular car, you actually have two different inputs. One of them is coming from the EWS module, which is the immobilizer module, and the other signal is coming from the DME module, which is the engine computer. You need both of those signals in order for the starter to engage and run. If you're missing any one of these four components, the starter will not function. Now, you could start anywhere to try to figure out which one you're missing, but the most obvious one, the one you want to start at first, is the battery. Just check your battery. Make sure that your battery is good. Make sure you've got 12.6 volts at your battery, okay? Make sure the thing's charged up. If you need to get a multimeter in order to do this. You can get a complicated multimeter. You can get a $10 multimeter from Harbor Freight. As long as it works and as long as it senses 12 volts, that's all you kind of need for this. Go check your battery at least. Make sure that it's got, either 12.2 to 12.6 volts. That means you're charged up. If it's low, charge the thing up. That is step number one. Step number two along those lines is you want to check your battery cables. You want to make sure that the connections are good. It's entirely possible that one of them can be loose or that one of them could have some corrosion, and that's going to offer resistance. You're not going to get full flow of all the power that you need in order to run this thing, because this thing requires a lot of power. On that note, it's also necessary to check all the connections of that battery cable all along, because that battery cable, on a BMW, it runs from the back of the car up to the engine where the starter and the motor lives. So you've got one cable running all the way along the body. On the E46, it's going to run along one side. On the E39, it's going to run along the other side. But either way, this cable runs up and it comes to a junction in the engine compartment where it kind of bolts in, and then another cable runs off of that and runs down to the starter. More or less, that's kind of how it goes on most of these engines. You want to check all those connection points and make sure that there's not corrosion on them. It's very possible, depending on the climate you live in, if you live like back east or if you live where they have salt on the roads, it's entirely possible you're going to build up green corrosion on those connections, and that could be your problem right there. Especially at the battery too. The battery, if your battery connection's all green and corroded, or it's got white crust on it and all that stuff, clean it off, man. Get in there, get a battery cleaner, battery terminal cleaner, take the connections off, clean them out, get down to the bare copper and put that back on. You know what I mean? Those are your basics that you got to start with. Another basic way to know if your battery is discharged or not is when you go out, you go to crank your car and the thing's not starting or whatever. Turn your headlights on and then try to start it at the same time. If your headlights come on, your headlights might come on if your battery is almost low, or if your battery, let's say if your battery's like too low to start the car, it could still have enough energy to power the headlights. So you can turn those headlights on, go to start the car. If the headlights dim at that point, that means that your battery is too low. If your battery doesn't have enough power to power the headlights and the starter at the same time, it's low, and you need to charge it up. So those are just the basic troubleshooting things you can do to figure out if it's your battery. So you need to go about figuring out which one of these four inputs that you're missing. And one way you could do that is you can get your multimeter. I guess everybody has one of these. You can hook that to battery negative and then you can hook this end to the battery positive stud on the starter solenoid. And that'll tell you if you have battery voltage there at the starter solenoid, but of course that doesn't tell you if that battery cable is capable of carrying enough current to engage the starter. In order to test that, you actually need to test the circuit while it's loaded, while it's being cranked. So you need to have somebody helping you. You need to have somebody in the driver's seat cranking it so you can test these things. And what you need to see, like let's say for instance, if your battery cable has corrosion inside of it at some point that's causing high resistance, or maybe at one of the connections, high resistance is actually going to cause voltage drop. So when you're cranking, when you're not cranking, you're going to see full battery voltage. And when you are cranking, you're going to see that voltage drop down significantly. So let's say, normally it's 12.6 volts. If your battery's fully charged up, you start cranking it, your partner, your helper starts cranking it, and that thing drops down to 7 volts. Huge voltage drop. You've got some problem with your battery cable. So to test the negative battery cable, you actually want to leave the negative terminal connected up at the top there. And you're going to take this and move this to the case on the starter solenoid. You should actually have 0 volts at this point, because there should be no difference between the negative cable of the battery and the case of the starter. But again, we need to crank the car in order to perform this test properly. So when it's cranking, again, it should remain 0. But if there's a problem with the ground and not all of the energy can get back to the battery through the ground, that energy is actually going to come back up through this cable, and it's going to start to cause a positive reading on your multimeter. And that's your voltage drop essentially on your negative side. So another way to actually test that is with a test light. You can just hook this to battery negative and touch that on the stud. It should light up, of course, when you're not cranking. And then when you are cranking, it should stay lit up. If you have voltage drop, the light's gonna dim or possibly go out. Right there, you have voltage drop. Similarly, you can hook this on battery negative and then touch this to the case of the starter. It should not be lit up because you have no power when you're not cranking. And when you are cranking, if everything was working right, all of the power would actually be flowing through the body of the starter, through the negative cable down to the battery. And this should not light up because there's no voltage drop. But if there is a voltage drop, if something's wrong with your negative, you are now supplying it with a negative right here, and your battery and your test light will light up. So 2 ways you can actually test for voltage drop, test your battery cables there. So the one problem with using a multimeter to do that voltage drop testing is that you don't know if the starter is good or not. You don't know if it's actually drawing those couple hundred amps that it needs in order to spin the engine over. And the problem is if you're using that to do voltage drop testing and you're cranking the engine, you could see voltage drop, but it could be from something else in the whole starting circuit. Other things are actually engaged when you're actually cranking the engine over. So other accessories turn on, things happen, and it might, that's not exactly a definitive test. So one way to actually do a definitive, yes, my battery cables are capable of passing the amperage needed in order to start the starter, is to substitute a load. So in other words, you take the starter out of the equation and you put your own sort of starter load in the circuit. So you want to use one of these if you have it. This is a carbon pile battery tester. I actually got this tip from watching one of Eric O's videos recently. It was really great. I'd never thought of it before, but this essentially, what this does is it puts a load on your battery. This one puts a 100 amp load on a battery, and that tells you if the battery is capable of delivering enough current in order to run a starter, right? So you can essentially use this to substitute a load. You can hook this to the case of the starter, hook this to the battery positive terminal on the starter solenoid, and then click it on. That's going to draw 100 amps through. Essentially what you're doing is you're still hooking this up to the battery. You're just hooking it up through the battery cables, right? So this is going to tell you when you turn this on, this is going to draw 100 amps through those battery cables. And this also has a voltmeter on it too. So you'll see if it can draw those, if the voltage is up where it's supposed to be, then your battery cables are fine. But if it drops down, that's why this has this little graph on it right here. In the green section, you can see that's about the 12 volt section. That's good. You don't have any voltage drop. If you're going down to 10, your battery's weak or your battery cables are weak and you're not going to be able to draw enough current, if you're down into the 8, you know, you're bad. You're not going to be able to actually spin that starter. So that's essentially what a carbon pile tester does, and that's a great thing to use on a battery or on down on a starter, because you're going to be able to confirm if your battery cables are good definitively. So now you've eliminated 2 of the 4 possibilities. You know your battery cables are good. Now you want to test to see if the 2 inputs are good, from the one from the EWS and the one from the DME. You want to see if one of these are missing. I like to use the test light. It's just so nice and easy and it's visual, you know. Hook at the battery negative, touch it on one of the studs. Hard to sort of touch it on the stud right here. Get your partner to crank the engine over. If the test light lights up, then you've got that EWS signal. Likewise, do the same thing for the DME signal. Crank it. If it lights up, you've got the DME signal. In that case, you know definitively that the starter is bad. But if you are missing one of these 2 inputs, it gets a little more complicated to actually diagnose that. And that's what Ismail is here to explain.
All right, hey guys, I'm back by popular demand. So I'm here to talk about basically the whole starting system of the car. So Jason just explained to you guys what a starter needs. It needs 3 inputs besides the ground. So you got the positive battery cable, you got 1 signal from the DME and 1 signal from the EWS, which is the immobilizer. So, but before I get into all that, let me explain to you a little bit on how the whole starting system works, like from beginning up until to the DME on where it will get the signal from the DME. So basically, first thing is you have your key, right? And your key has a small chip inside, which is, you saw in my previous video that I programmed to the car, which is called a transponder. All right. And then this right here is the ring. This ring is the plastic ring that's right on your ignition switch, not the switch, you know, the keyhole where the key goes in. You'll see a plastic ring. That ring has 2 functions. One of them is reading the data off this key, all right, and the other thing is charging the battery on the key. So right here, the ring reads the data off the key. The ring sends the information all the way to the EWS. Then now the EWS checks if this key is correct, if it has the right data, right VIN number, the right codes for it, or the password for it, if you want to make it simpler. And then once the EWS checks all that out, it also waits for 2 other signals. One is from the gear shift, which we'll talk about that later, and also one is from the ignition switch, which we'll talk about that later also. So after these 3 inputs come to the EWS, this signal right here sends a signal to the starter, which is one of the 3 that we had mentioned before that needs that starter needs to start, which is going to be the thicker one right here. So if the starter's in this way, it's going to be the one on the driver's side. Okay. So I get a lot of calls saying, "Oh my God, my car does not start. It's not, you know, it's not cranking, nothing, no clicking, no anything. Oh my God, my key is bad. My EWS is bad. My DME is bad. Even some people have told me." So there's one trick that I'm going to share with you guys to check out if it is the key or EWS. All right. First, get in your car. Put the key in your ignition. Turn it to the first click, not the one with the accessories. Just the first click, the first slight click you feel, right? And you should have your driver's door closed at that time. So once it's at the first click and you're inside the car, open your driver's door. Once you open that driver's door, you should hear beeping or dinging from the instrument cluster or from the car. It's like beep, 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 beep. That's on E46s, on E39s. It'll even tell you on the ignition, on the instrument cluster, it'll tell you key in ignition. All right. If you get that beeping and you get that message on your instrument cluster, that means the key is good and the ring is good. It's reading the data sent into the EWS, and the EWS verifies that the key is the right key for the car. If there's no beeping, then it's going to be one of these 3 things that are bad. So if there's beeping, then system is okay. No beeping, then one of these 3 things are bad.
The 3 things being the key, the ring, and the EWS.
Right here. Ring and EWS.
So right there with that one little test, you've eliminated those 3 things. If the thing is beeping, those are good.
Exactly.
That's really great.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a nice, easy test you can perform.
There you go. Now, to find out which one is bad, That I think we'll cover in another video, because it'll be honestly way too long to cover in this video.
And you need like some specialist hardware. You need that reader that you have.
If you do have this problem, hit me up. I will definitely help you out with that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Give Ismail a call if you're getting in depth.
Yeah. So if there's no beeping,
call Ismail.
Call Ismail.
Which honestly, I mean, that's where you need to go.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we're past this part. The car is beeping if you open the driver's door. Everything's good. Then we're up to we're fine. So 2 more things. You got the ignition switch and you got the gear shift selector. Okay, so the gear shift selector, there's 2 parts to it. Number 1, there's a fuse, number F14, which we'll talk about later, with the fuses part, and why this one, you know, would cause the car to not start. And the other thing is the actual selector in the car and on the transmission. So, like you guys know, if you've seen on Jason's many videos, is that in the car you have the gear selector, right? And then there's park, reverse, drive, and neutral, and all that. In order for the car to start, it has to be on the park, all right? And then on the transmission, there's also that selector up top goes down like links to a wire or a cable that goes to a manual selector on the transmission. Now that selector has to be pushed all the way to the left. Well, I don't remember if it's all the way to the left or right. So all the way to one end to make sure. Was it? You remember?
Well, okay. So to make it, I think the simplest. I think maybe what we should explain is that the gear shift selector. This is basically an electrical switch, and this electrical switch needs to be closed in order for the DME, in order for the EWS to actually send the start signal. So if this switch is not closed, that means that physically the selector might not be in park, or the bicycle cable, it's called a Bowden cable, but it's a bicycle cable essentially. That bicycle cable could not be in the park position, because Ismail's going to tell a story basically when he did his conversion. He go for it.
So I was following Jason's videos on how to swap my M54, but he actually did say this part. Make sure to make that the selector on the transmission is all the way to the park position, and I was in a hurry and I did not focus on that part, and I just hooked up the cable as soon as I got the transmission in and everything, and I bolted it up, went up top, tried to turn the ignition, nothing.
Yeah, see, so basically what happened is that on the linkage of the transmission itself, there's, the end of that cable like goes through the linkage, and then you just screw it down. So what could happen is that physically the lever could be in the correct position, but that cable could actually not be on the park cable itself. And you know what? I think what we're kind of talking about here is there's another signal that we weren't drawing in here. There's the transmission module is also connected to the EWS. So I think in your situation, what was happening is that the gear shift switch was closed, but the transmission knew that it wasn't in park. So the transmission module was telling the EWS, don't start. So basically, that's what was happening in your situation.
You're right. So you have the EGS right here, which is the transmission module.
Yeah, so that's essentially what was happening.
So EGS
to the EWS.
To the EWS, and the Gearshift Selector to the EGS.
Exactly. So that's essentially what was happening right there. So you can see how this begins to get more and more complicated. The EWS has lots of inputs, and those inputs all need to be in such a way. They all need to agree in order for the thing to start. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
So we've just covered gear shift. There is a fuse F14. You want to check that fuse. It's in your dash. It's in your glove box. Okay?
F14, yes.
F14 is in your glove box. Go ahead and check that fuse. If that fuse is burned out, car's not going to start. Okay.
Okay. So second thing is the ignition switch.
Yes.
So it's the actual module. It's not, because I've had a lot of people say, oh, my ignition switch is bad, and they replace out just the part where the key goes in. That's not your switch. That is just a mechanical input to put your key in and to turn it. And at the other end, there's actually a tab coming out, and it's connected to a black, like thick, almost L-shaped module, and that's your ignition module.
That's the switch itself.
Yeah, that's your actual switch. That's where that turns that part, and then there's 3 clicks to it, and then when you reach the third one, that's when the car starts. So that third click, the one right after the second click where you actually try to start the car, that's the signal.
That's the cranking signal.
Yeah, that's the cranking signal, exactly, from the ignition switch to the EWS.
Yeah.
So after you've done all this and you think all this is fine, if you're still not getting anything, then look at your ignition module.
Yeah.
Maybe it's gone bad. So replace it. It's not that hard. You just drop the bottom of your steering wheel and it's going to be right there.
There you go.
All right. So we cover pretty much everything related to the key and EWS and all that. Now that's just one of the signals that the starter needs, right? There's the other one that's from the DME. Now, in order for that signal from the DME to go to the starter, there's a connection between the DME and EWS. Okay, there's two things. There's a fixed code, and then there's a rolling code. The fixed code is called the ISN. Okay, so that is like a permanent link between the EWS and DME. If that ISN is wrong, the car will, no matter what you do to it, it will not start. It might crank and not start, and also it might not start at all. So that is very important. That you cannot like resync or do it with like INPA or something. That code is hard coded into the EWS and the DME. Not hard coded, but it's like it's on the actual EEPROM data of each of those modules. Okay, so that you cannot just change or get access to or read, or it's like very difficult to read, and you need special programs to do that. That being said, you have the right EWS, you have the right DME, then that code is fine. Now the second code is the rolling code. Okay,
Also called the sync code.
oh, the sync code.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So every time you turn on the ignition and try to start the car, that code flips. And it flips on both of these, on the EWS and DME. Okay? So sometimes that code falls out of sync. Like it would roll on the EWS and not the DME, or the other way around. Now, most of the time, I'd like to say 80% of the time, this happens is due to battery issues. You've had your car not connected to a battery for a very long time. Suddenly your battery voltage dropped while you were while you were parking next day.
I believe the
your
voltage
battery
drop
dies.
problems.
That causes a lot of problems,
Yeah.
especially in BMWs.
Yeah.
And actually, I've had a couple of cases where people just go to a gas station, put some gas, go buy something from a market or something, come back, boom, same thing happens for no reason at all. So that right there, honestly, for me, it's almost like a gray area, and almost every time I get one of these cases, 50% of the time, it's a new case for me. Like this happened, like I've never seen this happen before. So don't be afraid if this happens. There's an easy fix. It's an INPA. You have an option to resync the EWS and DME. There's a lot of other programmers that can do it. A little bit easier than INPA, but if INPA is all you have, it will do. How to find out if that's the problem you're having is get a scanner. A BMW scanner is the best. There's cheap ones on Amazon. I have one that's called the Creator. It's like $20-25. That's always my go-to scanner, especially for BMWs. Just scan it. You'll get an error message that says DME EWS anti-tampering within that context. If you have that error message or that code stored on your DME, then this is definitely your problem. Then that rolling code is definitely falling out of sync between those two modules, and you need a programmer to resync them, meaning resetting them both to the default value so that they start, from ground zero.
So it sounds like if INPA can reset that code, and INPA can tell you if you have that problem in the first place, probably INPA is the scanner to go for. It's $20 to buy that cable. You can find the INPA software online. Check out one of my videos. I'll link it in the description for how to get that. You don't have to use that, but it's probably what you should go for.
The best one, of course, is ISTA, the
which is the newer version of
exactly.
INPA, basically.
Here is a very helpful tip. Like, it took me a while to figure that out. Almost all programmers don't tell you that there's a procedure in order to do this. It's not just clicking on a button and boom, you're done. You actually have to have your key in the ignition to the accessory point, okay? And then you click on sync. and then it'll tell you synchronization complete. Once you do that, don't try to start the car right away. You'll just ruin all what you did. What you do is you turn off, take the key out, wait for about maybe 15 to 20 seconds, then try to start your car. Then it should be all fine.
That's important.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure that out. But so this link right here is good. If you have this code, resync them. If you don't know how to, call us, man. Anyways, okay, so up until a month ago, I thought this is all you needed to start the car, and this was all good. A month ago, I got a real weird case where the customer, it was an E39, and they had on the instrument cluster saying coding. That's all it says. Nothing else. Like even if you turn the ignition, do anything, all it says is coding, okay? And I thought to myself, like, what does the instrument cluster have to do with starting the car? Like nothing. Like, and it was this situation. It was a no crank, no start, or maybe a crank, no start. And it did have this error. Did it? No, actually didn't have this error message in there. So that's why I was kind of, okay, so this is the same symptoms as, you know, the EWS and DME rolling code sync issues, but it's not giving out the error message. So after like an hour of diagnosing everything you see here and everything as Jason told you about the starter and all that, and there's still a lot of points we're going to talk about, I just, okay, tell you what, let me just try to, you know, recode his instrument cluster. So I did that, and as soon as I did that, boom, the car started right away, no issues, no check engine light, no nothing. So that's why I added this part right here.
And what we're basically saying is that the DME and the instrument cluster talk to each other.
Yes,
and they need to be coded.
Yes, they talk to each other, and like obviously there's some kind of communication that has to go on between both of them in order for the car to start.
Yeah, probably in order for that DME signal to be sent out to the starter.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So after all this, you got the DME signal, you got the EWS signal, you got your battery. Make sure your battery's good. I can't tell you how many times people call me, tell me, you know, my key's wrong, or my DME's wrong, or something's wrong, or my starter's even bad. They go out to change the whole starter and everything. And at the end, the first thing I ask is, like, how's your battery? Oh, my battery's great. Oh, my battery's good. Okay, I believe them, of course. And after all this, I just, you know, jump in with my car starts. So always check your battery. Always, first thing you do, whenever you do anything, check your battery. I'm not going to say this enough times.
Oh, the one thing we didn't mention, there are two other fuses that power the EWS, right?
That's what I was getting to right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right now, after all this, I'm going to hand it over to Jason to talk about the fuses you need to check so that, you know, after all, you know, actually, the fuses you can check even before all this. It's up to you which order, like he said in the beginning of the video, it's up to you which order you want to start with. We're just giving you everything that you might encounter to troubleshoot a no crank, no start issue.
So the only thing I want to add to this is that there are two more fuses involved with this that you want to check. For the ignition switch, there's an F105 fuse, and for the EWS, there's an F67 fuse. So those two fuses combined with the F14 fuse, you want to check all three of those. If any one of those is blown, the thing's not going to crank at all. And then one other thing I do want to cover is just kind of, you know, this got super complicated, obviously. It's a complicated system. I mean, I honestly had no idea there was this much until he even suggested this video and I started researching it all. But the thing is, you can kind of keep it simpler if you just look down over here and you realize that all this stuff, all it's doing is it's getting you power. These two 12-volt power signals right here. So if you're able to test if these things have those 12-volt powers or not, you can kind of figure out, you know, you can get a direction to go in, right? So the thing is, though, you know, and I was talking about this at the beginning of the video, you know, you get your test light in there and touch on this one, you get your test light touch on this one. Well, that's actually going to be really difficult to do because this thing is buried underneath the intake manifold, especially on the E46. It's impossible to get at, especially the back one right here. It's going to be impossible to get at those and touch your test light on those or your multimeter. So what you want to do in that case, what you could do is you could go to the other end of this wire. You can go to the EWS and you can back probe the EWS connector. The EWS is underneath where the driver's side footwell is. It's just the little module. If you get under there and look up, It's just the white module. You'll see it, okay? You can get under there. You can unplug the connector. You can take one of these. This is a T-pin. See what that looks like? Here, let me get you focused on that. You can get those at like the sewing store or whatever. Those are real cheap and easy. You can stick that. You can back probe the connector. This is going to be pin 1 on the EWS. If you pull out the connector, you'll see that they're numbered, okay? And you'll see which one is pin number 1. You back probe it. You plug the connector back in. You try to start it. You get your third hand and you touch your multimeter or your test light to this thing, and if it lights up, then you know your EWS is good. Everything, all this stuff is all good. The EWS wants to start the car, okay? That's number 1. Number 2, on the DME, I forget which pin it was. Oh yeah, it's pin number 12. On DME, it's pin number 12, and the connector is going to be the X6003, and I did print this out. So this is going to be the X003 connector. It's the one that has 52 pins on it, not the one that has 24 pins. So I'm just going to give you guys this. The X003 connector, which it looks like that's the middle connector. There, when you look at the DME, there's going to be, it's the middle connector that has the flip-up thing. So if you pull that thing off and you find pin number 12, back probe that guy, and if your test light lights up, then you know the DME is good. If you've got the 2 signals going to your starter, and you've got a good battery cable and a good ground, and the thing is not cranking, you've got a bad starter. All right, well, I think we covered quite a bit there. It got pretty complicated. That's a lot. So I think basically what we want to say is that if they're having problems, if they're unsure with if their EWS is working or not, if their key's working and whatnot, then they need to contact you.
Yeah, just contact me on Facebook or my phone number. You got to text me, call me.
In the description.
Yep.
All that info's in the description.
So first thing, I'll try to help you out without you actually having to send me anything or to meet me and see if we can try to pinpoint where the problem is on the phone, or on message or anything. If not, then another option is you can send me your EWS, your key, and your DME, and then I'll figure everything out for you and fix it, and then mail it back to you.
There you go. Cool. So, guys, I hope you found this info helpful. And if you did, if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. I'm the 50s Kid. This is Ismail.
Thanks
for
guys.
watching.
See you next time.
All right.